There you go. All right, we're on. Yeah, so before we get started, hi, you know me now. Some basic housekeeping. We'll be twice a week in this room, 2 o'clock. Right. The syllabus is on Canvas. Won't be handing it out or anything. So whenever you need anything that's sort of the basic information of the course, then that'll be on the syllabus. If you have any questions about that, email me or ask me in class. Right? You know this stuff. The basic setup of the class is this. So social and political philosophy will be going over some of the major and enduring questions in the field. Now it's a huge field, like most fields are, so you have to make some choices. Here are the choices I made. If you've looked into the syllabus, you'll have seen that I kind of cut the semester into 3 parts. First part is sort of the most fundamental question of political philosophy, is why, if at all, is the state or is government justified, morally speaking? Like, most of us, well, all of us live under governments. Almost all of us think that this is in some way, shape, or form a good idea. Not everyone does this, and in any case, there is an interesting philosophical question about whether this is a good idea, even if we all believe it. Right? Whether we can justify, morally speaking, doing the things that are being done today to people all over the world at a daily basis. Right? Governments use force, they use coercion, they use guns, they use prisons, they take money, right? They boss you around in all sorts of ways. And so the question is, what gives? Right? Is this something that we can do with justice, or is it something that we better, if we can, stop? And if we can do it with justice, then what kind of ways must we do it in order for it to be justified? So that's the most fundamental question, right, of political philosophy. Like, should there be such a thing at all? That turns out to be a pretty difficult question to answer. Well, all philosophical questions are. So we'll spend some time on that. We'll look at some of the classics, Hobbes, Locke. We'll look at, in a little more detail, at some more modern versions of arguments for democracy. A lot of people now think that there's something special about democracy, so we'll look at those. And we'll look at people who've been skeptical of these arguments, what philosophically we call anarchists. Don't necessarily think of like throwing Molotov cocktails, but anarchists, like people who think that maybe there is no justification to this thing. So we'll see that. That's the first unit. We're like, okay, should there be a government at all? Then the second and third units really are questions are like, okay, if there is going to be a government, what kind of things ought it to be doing? So, and we're going to look at, again, this is just a choice I made, in particular on sort of economic or distributive justice questions. So first, or second, I guess. Second unit is just a question of what is justice? And what kind of questions are we dealing with? Conceptually, what is justice? What kind of different views are there of justice? And so on. And then the third one is looking a little more narrower even, looking at sort of questions of inequality and property. And so we start with the most, the broadest question of should there be a government at all? Then we narrow it down a little bit. Okay, like if the government is going to be in business, should it be in the business of, it should probably be in the business of enforcing justice. What is that thing? And then we look at one subset of justice. There's a variety of forms of justice, but one justice is distributive justice. So it's kind of like we're funneling, right, as we go throughout the term and getting more and more specific. That's the idea behind the class. Now the first unit, what justifies the state, we'll start with next week on Tuesday. So today, after I've done all these preliminaries, and Thursday we're going to look at just going to do some groundwork, which is I'm going to try and discuss with you some very basic things about what's the way that we're going to approach these questions. So first, for today, hopefully you've read this piece on analytical political philosophy. It's just a piece on method, right? What's the kind of approach that we're going to take? How are we going to try and answer these questions? And then next time, hopefully, we'll talk a little bit about this type of state of nature theories, which we'll see a lot in the first unit of class, and what's the point of those. All right, that's the roadmap. Some basic rules or things to expect, or things that I'll expect. There will be 3 exams that we'll take here in class at the end of each unit. So unit 1 ends with an exam that just deals with unit 1. Unit 2 with one that just deals with Unit 2, Unit 3 with one with an exam just about Unit 3. So we'll just chop up the term in 3 parts that way. At the end of term, there will be a paper. That paper can be on any topic that you choose that we've discussed. It can connect several topics and so on. Later on, as we go along, I'll suggest some examples of topics, but really you should feel free to write on what you find interesting. On the end of this week, there will be a short essay question about what we've talked about today and Thursday. And on top of that, I have this method, which some of you will know who've been with me in previous classes. So I post, like I did for today, just a couple of basic reading questions before every class. They'll appear on Canvas. For today's class, there should have been 3 basic reading questions on Canvas. And it's really like, these are not supposed to be very complicated questions. It's really kind of question that you can answer if you've read it, and just with some attention. And then at 5 points throughout this term, at the beginning of class, unannounced, there will be a pop quiz. Which basically is the same reading questions that you see, like verbatim, right? The actual questions that I've posted on Canvas before. I'll project them up here and I'll ask you to write out to just give me your answers. At the end of term, I will use the 3 best grades out of those 5. So you get 2 sort of mulligans. I'll drop your 2 lowest grades, the 3 best of those. The average of that will be part of your final grade. The syllabus breaks it exactly down. It's 20% for each exam. I believe 20 for the paper. Then 15 for these reading questions and 5 for the essay at the end of this week. Top of my head, but it's a couple days ago that I looked last, so don't pin me down on whatever's in the syllabus, right? So those questions will be exactly the same that you get on that'll be on Canvas, so you know them beforehand. If you read, you should be able to ace this. People who show up regularly and who read regularly have a nice way of pulling up their grade, because it'll be 15% of your final grade, and if you just show up and read regularly, then you should ace that, and that should, it's a magnet upwards. Now, it doesn't mean that you always have to be here. I know you live complicated and busy lives, so if you have something else to do and you miss one, that's okay, because there will be twice that you can be here without counting against you. Not all the time do I have the thing, so it's like a soft attendance requirement. I don't like policing and taking roll call. But on a group of this size, we kind of have to have an incentive for people to be here and have read. Otherwise, when the weather gets nice, things get quiet in here. And that's not good for the class, because these things work best when people do come prepared and we interact, we talk. And by we, I mean not me like I'm doing now, but we. All right. The exams, so the end of each unit there will be an exam that just deals with that unit. There will be some multiple choice questions and an essay question. If you've taken class with me before, like last term, then basically the same format. I'll post some examples on Canvas before the first exam, so you know what's coming. All right, so far so good. Anyone any questions so far about this? Those are just make sure that you know what we're going to be doing.
The essay question with the right? Like the papers.
Sorry?
Like the papers, we have to print them out.
Are you talking about the essay question at the end of this week?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can just bring it to class next Tuesday. And it's not, I think I said 500 words, so it shouldn't be maybe 1,000 words, I'm not sure. I posted it. 500 or 1,000, whatever is on Canvas. Yeah, so, and that's the max. So it shouldn't be too long, but it's going to be something that we've talked about, something about method, and it'll be either exactly or very close to one of the reading questions that are on Canvas. So it's, I'm not trying to sandbag you here, just asking you to think about something. What's your name, by the way? Emmanuel? Jorge, Cameron, Ian, Dominic. I think that's all the people here I ought to know. I've seen you before, but I don't remember your name.
Brittany.
Brittany. Yes. You're in 121, is that right? Intro to ethics, or
Yeah.
right? It was 919. Yeah. Yeah. Everyone else, I'll ask you your name a couple of times probably. There's always one or two who I can't quite seem to remember, like Brittany, I guess. So don't take it personally if that's you. That's just my, I don't know, I have a young kid, so blame sleep deprivation, which is real, I can tell you. All right, about in class. So I don't take attendance, right? Although there is this soft attendance requirement, or at least incentive. If you want to throw away 15% of your grade, I guess you can just not show up. But that's strongly advised that you don't do that. Your grade will be compiled the way we just said. About in class, the way I do it, one of my classes is I'll come with some PowerPoints prepared. So what I'll be doing is I'll be going over the reading. I'll try and sort of explain and make explicit some of the arguments that are there, which I think are the most important things for what we're trying to deal with here. We'll go through these. I hope that you'll discuss and talk things with me. Some classes that goes very well. Last term, I had a class went very well. Some classes doesn't go so well, so it's kind of up to you. All I can say is it's in your interest as much as mine to participate. And the reason for that is, well, there's a couple of reasons. But the most important one, the most selfish one, is that that really helps with just retaining information. It's the best way to process the stuff that we'll be talking about, to actively participate. And if you're going to be here and given these reading questions are coming up, if you've read it anyway, well, you might as well talk about it, right? Otherwise, you're wasting your time. Please don't feel embarrassed or afraid to ask things, or like shy or whatever. When I was a student, I almost never talked because I was afraid to raise my hand. I was shy. And that's stupid. It's really not in your own interest to do so. It's the only time I'll tell you that you're stupid. My point is, if you ask a question, I try my very best to not make you feel like you asked a stupid question. People say there are no stupid questions. You'll know that's a lie. There are stupid questions. But, you're not stupid people, so the chance that you'll be asking a stupid question is near zero, right? So have some confidence. If you ask a question, even if you think it might be a stupid question, it probably is that something was difficult to understand or unclear, or maybe it's a simple mistake that we can clear up quickly, but it's one that a lot of people make. My point is, if you think about it, probably someone else has thought about it too, and they are probably shy as well, or tired, or a little afraid to ask a stupid question, or whatever, right? So you probably you're definitely doing yourself a favor. You're definitely also doing me a favor, but most likely also doing other students a favor. So. Yappity yap. My one rule with this, and that's really my only rule. I don't have any rules about stating what you believe or what there are no right answers. Well, there are better and worse answers, but there is no sort of party line or view that I'll be defending or try to defend or impose on you or dissuade you from. What might happen is if you say something and I think you give an argument for it which is not good, I'll challenge you to try and defend it better, or try to point out why I think the argument for that view is not correct. But in the end, the whole point of this class is for you to start thinking about social, political, philosophical questions on your own, right? And so the goal here is to develop your ability to think about those things. Which means I will never come down on you for what you say, right? We'll discuss it, and I might challenge you, and you might challenge me back. I hope you do. That's the whole point. The only thing, if I'll ever have to come down on anyone, it's for this. It's for the way you say it. Right? So this is my one rule. My one rule is when you discuss things with me, but more importantly with each other, you got to be respectful of each other. Some of these issues are that we'll be discussing, especially the ones when we get later on about like inequality and property and so on. People disagree about pretty heavily, right? And sometimes people get passionate about these kind of questions. That's cool. That's all right. But do make sure that when people defend or try and argue for a view that you think is really, really wrong, And even if you think they give really, really crappy arguments, you can disagree, you should disagree, but do so in a respectful way. Right? If somebody else goes after you in a way that's not respectful, I don't know if this is much solace, but I'll stand up for you. I have done so in the past. So, you know, if there's any, I say this on the beginning of every term, if there's any point to doing what we're doing here in the university, it's that there's a free exchange of ideas where we try and test which ones are the best ones or where the truth might lie. The only way that's going to work is if the classroom is a place where everyone feels that they can raise and defend and say the things that they think are true. So it's very important that in a classroom everyone feels safe to really speak their minds, and keep that in mind. Right? All right. Any questions? Anything unclear so far? All right. Two last things, very short. Office hours. So I've kind of gone off my old policy of office hours. My old policy was I have set office hours, and then no one shows up, and then people who want to show up say, I can't make your office hours, so I end up scheduling them. Right? So what I've started doing is I've stopped having office hours and then just schedule with people. I see a lot of people throughout term. It's not that no one wants to show up. It's just that I always find that whenever I would schedule office hours would clash with almost everyone's class schedule and so on. So if you want to see me, and please do, send me an email. Right? We'll set up a time that works for you and for me, and we'll meet. That's one. The other is there will be most of the text for this class will be provided by me online. We'll be reading a bunch of classics. The one text, there will be a number of things that we read from this book. It's Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State and Utopia. I see you have it already. That's the one thing for which the readings from this I won't post online, just because there was too many. There are these fair use things I can provide, like a chapter or passages of a chapter of most books, and the classic things are they're available freely. They're no longer under copyright, but this one was too much. So you got to find a way to access this book yourself. Buy it, get it out of the library, borrow it, whatever. I don't care. Get it. I'll say one thing, just by way of context. That's the only reason why this is the book that I ask you to buy. When we get later on in the questions about justice and distribution, you'll see, if you don't know it already, this book takes a pretty strong position on one side of the spectrum. It's a very sort of strongly libertarian book. I'm not asking you to buy it because I think you ought to own libertarian works or whatever. That's not the point. In some ways, some books that we'll be reading will probably will be more enduring or have bigger contributions. We'll contrast this book with Rawls' Theory of Justice, for example. Almost everyone thinks that's a more important work of philosophy. Now, I could have asked you to buy that and then throw another $30 against the wall. But Rawls' Theory of Justice, one of the things it's so great, but it's super dense. Right? So in order to get through that, I've assigned you 10 pages 2 or 3 times, so to speak. I'd ask you to buy a book this thick for 30 pages. So this is, for however great or bad you might think of it is an easy read. Right? So we'll be reading more in terms of just the number of pages, and that's the reason why we buy that book. Or you get that book somewhere. The bookstore should have them on order. I ordered them. They should be there. Did you get it at the bookstore by any chance? All right. Well, that was yeah. Otherwise, tons of copies floating around everywhere. Right? You can buy yours on Amazon. There is lots of secondhand ones of it. I think I'm supposed to actually not say that, but there's lots of secondhand ones of it. So, for Thursday, we'll be reading the first chapter, which is like a 6 or 7 page chapter only. Just because I wasn't sure if everyone would get it, and I've had mishaps with the bookstore in the past. So that chapter is posted online, but it'll be the only time I post something from there online. I think that's pretty much it. All right. On to business then. What time is it? Oh, there you go. It's not too bad. Are you still awake?
Yes.
Okay. It's the first day of term.
It's my first day of class.
It's not supposed to be that. You're not supposed to be tired yet.
I'm just reacclimating to the situation. I got 6 jobs. I don't care.
All right. Wait, what? Go away. Sorry. What are you doing? No thanks what? It's not first things, it's not even asking me a question. No thanks. Okay. Was that, am I going crazy? Is it? Sorry. I guess there's, I used to think that you'd have to have a question before you could give an answer. But, there you go. We're going to challenged already. Right? These will be appearing on Canvas too, so you don't have to, keep up writing down all these things. Please don't. I encourage that you may take notes, but take notes of like things that are being said or IDs that you get or something, right? Without actually. All right. So I asked you to read the McDermott piece for today. It's a methodological piece, right? So it's going to be it's an article about or a chapter about one particular way of doing philosophy. It's not the only way of doing philosophy, but it's kind of, at least in the American and English and sort of Northwestern Europe, it's very much the dominant way of doing it. It's called analytical political philosophy. Before I start yapping along again, does anyone want to give a shot, try and have a shot at like describing what that method looks like? Like, what does it mean to take an analytical approach to philosophy? What's your name, sir?
Tyler.
Tyler.
It seems like a big part of it involved like using epistemic kind of like references, but also using ideals. It kind of comes down to it said in the piece what feels right, kind of what seems like a good idea for the I think.
Yeah, yeah. That sounds more subjective maybe than McDermott means it, but yeah. I think that's right. Ultimately, I guess this point was that you're picking up on is that these are questions that what tools do we have in our toolbox, right, as philosophers? So if you're a chemist, right, you have little tubes, right, and you have microscopes and all sorts of more sophisticated tools. And what you do with those is you try and sort of set up tests or experiments for testing, like investigating the way that a certain part of reality operates, right, like the chemical part. And so what do? You have observations, right? Like ultimately in an experiment, the idea is to produce certain observations from which you can draw conclusions. Now we don't have these type of experiments of observation. We have thought experiments. We'll talk about thought experiments today, maybe Thursday, because state of nature theories are ways of doing thought experiments. So thought experiments is a way, it's similar to science in that regard, but ultimately when we test like what we think is right, there is this sort of appeal to intuition at some level that's very common, right? And so that's what feels right. It's not really what feels right necessarily, it's sort of what feels right and we can hold consistently with other things that feel right, right? Sometimes things feel right and then when you think about it, it turns out that they weren't right and then you start feeling about them differently, like most of the time. Yeah. But that already is part of the method, right? What we're doing, like this sort of unpacking of the idea or the issue so that we get back to something that we can start asking, does this seem right or feel right? All right, let's start at the very tippy top. So just as a preliminary, what's an analysis? Does anyone give an idea what it is to analyze something? Just as a shot across the bow. Yeah.
To use like logical reasoning to figure something out?
Yeah, good. To look. Yeah, can you give an example maybe? Like an everyday life example?
I don't know why this just popped in my head, but I always think of like an episode of SpongeBob where Plankton like steals Krabby Patty and then he puts it into a machine which like analyzes it into like the different pieces and like what it's made up of.
Nice.
If that plays.
Yeah. No, it's not, right? So to analyze, what is it? What does he throw in a machine?
It's Krabby Patty.
Crap. Okay. I have a 7-month-old now, so I know this is in my future. I'm not that old, but SpongeBob did come after me. But yeah. So yeah, so a burger thrown in a machine,
Yeah.
and then analyzing is to breaks it down into several. Right. So good. So you can take it apart in several pieces, right?
Yeah.
Now, why would you do that? Why did you want to take it apart in several pieces?
To figure out what it's made up of and what
Right.
it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. To understand the thing, right, that you're looking at, in this case, a burger, I guess, you want to know. Like one way to understand what it is or how it works is to figure out what are the pieces that go into it, right? Like what's it made up of? What are the constituent elements or the parts or something, right? Sorry, what's your name?
Will.
Will. Tyler Will. Emmanuel? Is that right? Right. So, all right, so yeah, here's, well, first of all, it's a method, right? So this is me just trying out a very rough definition. It's a method of studying something that's complex. Doesn't have to be super complex, can be a burger, right? But a complex in the sense that it's put together out of different, like it has different constituent parts, right? If it was just a singular, like the smallest particle, maybe you couldn't analyze it because it would just be that thing, right? You couldn't say anything more about it than it's the smallest thing that can no longer be divided or something, right? But something complex we can analyze. We can take it apart into its pieces, into its parts, or its elements, right? And then the idea is that that's telling us something, right? Something interesting. So one example is to decompose it or take it apart into more fundamental or simpler parts, right? So you might think, so the burger is made up of beef and maybe egg and some butter or something, whatever, right? Onions and stuff. And you might think, well, the burger is more complex than the constituent elements. Like it's simpler to make. Beef is simpler than burger, right? Because a burger consists of beef plus another couple of things. And then you have to season it and cook it and so on. That's pretty complex, right? But not always, right? So you can analyze things without, when they don't really, what goes into them doesn't always have to be simpler, right? So think about analyzing the weather or something, right? Like, so it's raining today, you want to know why. So you might go to like the weather.com or something, right? And they have these little videos that tell you they analyze the weather, right? And that turns out, so it's raining. Raining is not that complex, right? It's water falling from the sky. It's a little more maybe, but that's roughly it. But then it turns out, if you want to analyze why is it raining, you have to know all sorts of things about climate, processes and how the wind and how high pressure, low pressure, and then maybe the turning of the earth. It turns out really complex, right? But it's still an analysis. Because you're still you're going back into what goes into it. So it's not always from simpler to more complicated, but it is moving from one thing that builds up into another. Right? And then the other thing, you're learning something about the other by learning what goes into it. Now if it's built up with complex things, then you can further analyze those, and so you keep analyzing till the cows come home, I guess. But at some point, if you want to learn something, if you think you understand something about high pressure and low pressure areas, then you might learn something about why it's raining. Right? If you think you know what an onion is, right, and you know that an onion goes into a burger, then you learn something about what a burger is. Right? So roughly, so here's some examples, right? You can think of analyzing a chemical compound, taking it in, you have a molecule is a complex of several atoms, so you analyze it by looking what atoms. The atoms maybe are simpler than the compound, than the molecule. But in the weather or in the news, maybe, right, you might say, well, why is Donald Trump leading in the polls? You get a very complicated story, right? Maybe not, I don't know. But you get what I mean, right? It doesn't always have to go from simple to, but it goes from something that you understand to explaining something that you trying to know something about. Right? So in our case, right, we're going to ask that use this method to think about politics. Right? Any shots about politics? Rough, like I'm doing rough. This is all shooting from the hip, right? Anyone? What's politics? Like what are we talking about here?
It seems like an organizational system for like things in a way.
Yeah, well, you're already more detailed than I was going to be, but yeah. Yeah, so it has to do with control, it has to do with organization, like of societies, or, right, or groups of people, or places in the earth, right? Without having to get all the way into that, we can just say this, right? So it's a topic of the role of government or the state in life, right? So the state being the organization you're trying to define, which is then run by a government. There are, you have stock definitions of what a state is. Max Weber's is the most famous one. It's like it's the thing that monopolizes legitimate coercive force in a society, something like that. So Weber defines the state very much by the use of force. Right? So basically, the state is whoever has the most guns, more or less, right? It's too simplistic, of course, but you get the point. Right? It's not just whoever has the most guns; it's whoever has the most guns and somehow has some sort of legitimacy or seems to be, or claims at least, to be using this force in a way that is justifiable, that sets it apart from, say, the mob or something, right? Or ISIS or something. ISIS is not a state because it doesn't have this type of claim to legitimacy, then the argument goes. But Iraq might be the state, not ISIS, even though it's questionable who has the monopoly on violence. Right? So that's roughly the idea. So whatever that thing is, the state, that sort of that gets us a good sense of what we're talking about, right? So whatever that position is that Donald Trump is running for, it's the head of that thing, the state, right? If you know what so the White House, that's the heart of the state, right? And so our question is going to be about analyzing this topic, right? The state or the role of government. All right. So here's a note. Very simply, like McDermott emphasizes, we'll ask normative or moral questions. So you can ask questions about descriptive questions, right? Like, what is the role of the state? That's a complicated question. Political scientists spend their lives pursuing this. Very interesting, but it's not what we're going to be doing. What we're going to be doing is ask the moral, the normative question. That's more philosophical in a way. So we're going to be asked, what should it be doing? Like, should it exist at all? If so, what's its role in our lives? Should it be large? Should it be small? Should it be limited in some ways? If so, where should these limits lie? And so on. Right? And so our analytical method, right, and is then what are the underlying moral principles that determine this role? We're going to try and unpack. We have the state doing things, and we're going to try and unpack it like the burger machine. Right? Throw the state in the burger machine and then see what are the elements, morally speaking, that go into it. If we're going to have a justified state, what parts help us justify it, and what does it tell us about this, where the state should be and what it should be like? All right, I have a question for you. So McDermott writes that the aim or the goal of analytical political thinking is the same or similar to that of science. Why would he say that? Does anyone remember that? Any ideas why he would say that? Will?
I think it was at the beginning. He said that the scientists were supposed to find out the knowledge, like the facts of the situation, and then it was the philosopher's job, like political analyst-wise, to look at those facts and then think of what governments ought to do or what was right for the governments. Right? That's not right. I just remember the word ought a lot.
Yeah. Ought, even plural, right?
Yeah.
Oughts, even. Yeah. Yeah. So he's saying, since he's also thinking about analytical normative philosophy, he also thinks that we're asking these moral questions, right? About what should it be? Should just being a more colloquial or way of using ought, right? Ought being the technical term, like what ought it to be like. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And then he compares it with science, that task of Dominic.
I was going to say, he says that, like, you know, in both analytical philosophy and science, you're both observing a set of phenomenon and coming to a conclusion. But in science, the phenomenon you're observing, the conclusion you're drawing is like how things are actually like, you know, performing and like what you're actually observing. But the role of the analytical philosophy is to observe this phenomenon, come to this conclusion, which your conclusion is, okay, this is what's going on, but this is what we should be doing to make things like better, or how it could be better. You know?
Good, yeah. Yeah, Cameron?
I was going to say, the science is like, let's gather the information. The political philosophy is, okay, we got the information. What are we going to do?
Right. So, yeah, I think all of these are on the right track. So what he's saying is, I think what Dominic said was closest in this sense. You're right about it. We have there's a division of labor here, right? So it's a division of is, or what is the case, the description. That's what the scientists are doing, right? And then there's the question of ought, the division of ought. Like, what are we going to do with it, right? So given the facts, how should we run our social life, or how should we run our political life? How should we run the state, if at all? So in that sense, there is a division of labor. They're very different, right? The scientists do discuss this is part, and the philosophers will then look at the ought questions. On the other hand, this is what Dominic was saying. I think McDermott is trying to indicate a similarity. He's saying, but we're doing fundamentally the same task. Our questions are different, is versus what ought. Right? What is the state, or what ought the state to do, are different questions. But our approach, or the method, he says, is very similar. So he thinks science and at least the analytical philosophers are using the same method in the sense that there's going to be a phenomenon out there, whether it be a chemical reaction, right? So you throw some table salt into a glass of water, it dissolves. That's that's something we can observe, right? And then we can draw conclusions from it, like study it and then figure out how, why, whatever, right? Under what conditions, and so on. That's one way of trying to gather information about the facts. But then there's another phenomenon out there, which is whether or not it's right or wrong that the government is doing such things, certain things. Right? The government is taxing people. Is that right? Is it wrong? If so, when and where? Right? That's a different type of phenomenon, raising a different type of question. Right? It's government's duties, and then there's a phenomenon, he claims, a moral phenomenon about whether that's the right thing to do or not the right thing to do. And just like the scientist studies the phenomenon of, like, say, salt dissolving in water, we are going to study the moral question about, is this the right thing to do or not? Should there be governments? There's going to be an answer to this, just like there is an answer to whether salt dissolves in water. One way to find out whether or when salt dissolves water is, do some chemistry. To find out whether and when governments are justifiable, we do some political philosophy. He says it's basically the same task. Now that's kind of controversial, right? I think maybe some of you, and definitely some people outside of this type of classroom who haven't done philosophy much, will think, no, that's a very different set of questions. It's a different topic. You can't think that there's just a fact of the matter about whether the government ought to exist, just like there's a fact of the matter of, like, salt dissolving in water. These are very different types of inquiry and different types of questions. Much of the piece, McDermott, is him trying to go through different reasons why you might be worried about this, why you might think, well, no, these are very different, and then he's trying to knock them down, right? Say, no, actually, if you think about it carefully, they really are the same. Oh, maybe you think this, well, that's a really bad idea, and then, so everything goes on and on. So, sorry, Tyler, you had your hand up a while ago.
No, I was just kind of trying to understand, it seems like, it's, science is more epistemic, and this is more instrumental in the end, even though they're both kind of pulling from that same initial, idea.
What do you mean by epistemic and instrumental?
Like, the science isn't, I would argue personally that science is to an end, it's not just getting knowledge for the sake of getting knowledge, it's because they want to use that knowledge to improve something. Mm-hmm. It seems like this is kind of the same way. And I guess I was just wondering if that was the connection of the two, that they both are gathering this information, but in the end they're for, some cause of trying to make the world the way we think it ought to be.
Right. Yeah, some people say, knowledge is sort of valuable for its own sake. Maybe, right? But lots of people want knowledge in order to know how to live the life or how to order their actions so that they get what they want or they care about or they think is important or something, right? Yeah. It's interesting how far you could push that. Anyway. Yeah, well, to put it bluntly, right, here's what McDermott at least thinks. And I think this is true as well, but like I said, it's not, it might seem startling at first, but so the basic idea is this, just seeking the truth. That's the point. That's what we're doing here. And the analytical method is the way to get at the truth. So there's a truth about salt dissolving in water, right? There's a truth about how much salt you can dissolve in how much water. There's a truth about how quickly or how much you can do it under certain temperatures, right? Under certain pressures and all these things, right? There's a truth about the matter. this truth replicates, right? If you do it one time, it's the same as the other time, it's the same as the other one. So we think, well, because it's doing this over and over again, it's probably just a fact that here are the conditions, and you can find them. The idea being here that if we ask these questions about what the state ought to be like, what role it should play, we write all these philosophical papers and books and articles, and we read them, and we study them, and we discuss them, and we talked about them, right? Why are we doing this? McDermott thinks, well, we're in the university for a reason, right? It's not just us sort of voicing opinions or feelings or what have you not. It's really, are we trying to study this? There is going to be an answer to, is it okay for the government to just take all your property? Right? Some people think, yeah, right? Like if you're a hardcore Marxist, then you think, yes, that's right, that's okay. It should all be abolished anyway. Some people, Nozick thinks, no, that's not right. Not any takings, actually, he thinks are wrong. Lots of people think that the answer lies somewhere in between. But all of them are trying to formulate theories, right, that capture something about an issue. Right? And there's an issue there, like is it right or not? McDermott says, okay, if there's an issue there, and there is an answer to that issue, then we have a field that tries to study where the answer is. Now, the field is not very successful all the time, right? Like we have lots of disagreement about this, and it's going on for years, for hundreds of years. But then again, it's a very complicated question, so we're getting better at it, maybe. McDermott thinks we're getting better at it. I think we're getting better at it, but now here's why this is controversial. Some people do believe that there is no truth about these things. Right? They think that the role of the government in this country, say, what's the right role of the government in this country? That's not the same thing as, say, in France or something, right? In one way, if there is a truth about it, you'd think that, well, the truth about salt replicates, right? So like you dissolve salt here or you dissolve salt in France, it does the same thing. It's salt and water, right? And you might think, well, if there's individual people have rights to liberty or property or something here, and there's a truth about it, then it should be probably the same in France. And then so if there's a truth about how the government should be run here, that truth is the same in France. Right? And if you don't believe that, you might think, well, there is no truth about it. So two things. One is, so McDermott is trying to convince you that there is a truth. Most of this term will proceed as if there is a truth that we're trying to find. It's an assumption. Right? I'm not trying to show you, McDermott doesn't give you a knockdown argument. He doesn't demonstrate with full 100% ironclad proof that there is a truth. It's a philosophical question itself whether there is this truth. Right? I sure can't show it to you. I can't demonstrate it here, like this is the logical derivation, there it is. There must be a truth. I think there is one. And I think this term would be pretty pointless if there wasn't one, because if there was no truth, I'm not sure what we're talking about. Right? But it's an assumption. Right? So that's one. Here's the other one. I'll get to you in a second. The other point, saying that there is a truth about it, about political philosophy, doesn't mean that the truth is that there is a one-size-fits-all answer to all questions. Right? So the truth might be that there can be some variation between how different governments are run. That's a possibility. Probably some things are just the same here, there, everywhere. Right? If you believe in basic human rights, for example, human rights are supposed to be standard rights that people enjoy here, in France, everywhere for all time. Right? Fixed points, things that no government can change or can mess around with without doing injustice. But human rights are only a small part of life, and there's a lot of other stuff, and so maybe there should be more human rights. Well, then you think that the truth is larger, right, than what we have right now. Maybe you think there should be fewer human rights, and you think the truth is narrower than these things. But we're talking about the truth here, like if you believe in that stuff. Anyway, I thought that was important to get on the table, right? Like this type of relativism where we think, well, this is just our opinion here and then their opinion there. It's very tempting, but it is kind of puzzling why we would engage in these activities if that really was the truth. If it really was no answer at all, like why are we studying this, right? Like, then it becomes, political philosophy becomes a little bit like astrology or something, right? Fairy tales, I mean fun, but actually I don't care for astrology, but fairy tales are fun. And at least we'll behave as if that's not what we're doing here. And I honestly think that's not what we're doing here, but like I said, I can't prove it to you.
I was going to ask, when you're talking about the truth, do you mean like the best way or like the only way? Kind of like when Albert and Roman were saying like, yeah, democracy might be like one of the better ways to run a government, but it's not the only way. Is that kind of what you're talking about? Are you saying like, the truth here we're talking about how things should be done, and like if we're going to say this is how it should be done, like that's universally how it should be done, or this is just like the best way in most cases? Everything. I'm not saying like it's like relativism. I'm just saying like,
Right.
because there are different ways things can be done, and like you can have ideas or not. Like yeah, democracy might be the best way to do it, but it's not universally right. You know?
Right. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's possible, right? So for a lot of questions, it might be that that's the answer, that there are different ways of doing it. I guess the point here is, so here's a question, right? Like what form should governments take in order for them to be justified or legitimate or something like that? So one possible answer is, well, they have to be democratic. Right? Very popular nowadays to think that any legitimate government has to be a democratic government. Now, not everyone believes this, as you know, right? But that's an answer, right? Just know there are multiple ways of having legitimate governments. That's an answer. If that's the right answer, right, then that's the truth. To say that there is no truth is going to say there's no answer to this. These are both equally.
Yeah, some people say, well, democracy is how you deal with government. People say, yeah, there's other ways of dealing with government. Democracy is just like a subset of that.
Right. 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 And so so this is a pretty modest point so far, right? Like it just says there's going to be an answer, whatever its content is going to be. That's the right answer to that question. Now so the answer might be a whole range of things are possible, right? And maybe there are some topics where it just doesn't matter, right? Like maybe, I don't know, like, well, whatever. But to deny this, right? So that's the study, right? We're asking, like, okay, what should we answer to this question? What's the right form of government? Maybe there's 3, maybe there's 5, maybe there's uncountably many, right? Maybe there's 1. Maybe it really is only democracy. Right? But to say that there is no truth means there is no answer, right? Yeah, and it means every answer you might give is equally valid or invalid because really, I mean, yeah, could I date a Sagittarius, right? Yes, no, who cares, right? It's not, doesn't really move me. Every answer is equally good and equally crappy, right? Because there's nothing what it's about. This is about something, right? At least that's what we're thinking. So, all right. So far, so good? Are we still on board with this? Anyone any questions or thoughts you want to bring up? So one thing that McDermott tries to show, by the way, that's interesting, I think, is he tries to show that when we do this analytical stuff that he goes over, right, how we try to connect the different odds, right, the different things that we believe in, that's very similar to the way that scientists tend to work too, rudimentary, right? Scientists also try to make these inferences. Scientists also make these assumptions, right? So the assumption that if I dissolve salt here under these conditions, it performs in way X. And then I do it again, and it performs in exactly the same way. And I perform it again, do it again, and it performs in yet exactly the same way, right? You do this 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times. The conclusion is, well, that's just how it performs. Right? That's an assumption. You don't know. You can't prove that the next time, the one that you haven't done yet, that one will do the same. You're assuming that these are that they're laws of nature and they are constant. Right? That's an assumption. And so everyone is like, okay, it's a pretty reasonable assumption. For all we know, it's true, but it is an assumption. So in that sense, you can't prove to me, right, that tomorrow salt won't stop dissolving in water. Right? Can't prove that to me. It might happen. Perfectly possible. Might happen. Wake up, right? Wake up, you start cooking, and the salt just floats on top of your dish. Right? Be pretty bizarre, big news, right? But it can, yeah, you can't prove to me that it won't happen. So you're assuming that, and then you just go with it. And so that's what we'll have to do. We'll do the same thing here, right? There's a couple of things that we just have to assume. We'll assume that certain things are wrong, right? At times we'll talk about individual rights. We have to assume then that people have rights. Now, maybe they don't. But that's just the game we're in. You have to kind of demarcate the plane. You have to say, like, okay, this is the question we're investigating, and you can't expect more than that. All right. So we're going to talk about theories. We're going to test theories. McDermott talks about this. Here's a theory. Roughly, it's just a bunch of statements, right? Things we say, sentences. And the sentences, the statements together purport to explain a certain complex factor or phenomenon. So if we're analyzing, right, and these statements are the things, like that's the unpacking, right? That's the complex phenomenon might be the burger, right? And then these statements are the meat and the onions and the butter and the egg and so on, right? In our case, the complex phenomenon might be the existence of government or democracy is justified, morally speaking. That's the claim. And then you have a theory that tries to explain why that is, right? And so then you might say democracies are the only thing that really treat people equally, and everyone has a right to be treated equally, blah, 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 democracy, right? That's you're unpacking the case for democracy into prior or more rudimentary elements, things that you can understand, right? You understand, well, we know what people to treat people equally. We know people have a right to be treated equally. Let's say that you're comfortable with that assumption, and you know there's your theory, right? So here's how McDermott describes it. What in political philosophy, a theory has this form, but it connects these oughts, right? So moral claims about politics that are true, right? So it's true that, let's say, the people have a right to be treated equally. And maybe it's true that democracies are the only way of treating people equally. If you think that, then you have your theory there, right? You're connecting several claims, including political oughts, into a theory of political philosophy. That's it. And so we try to find which normative claims about the role of the state are true. That's what we're trying to figure out throughout this term. So you might think, why are we going through this? Well, there's some upshot, right? Here's one, like the explaining part is important, right? Learn something about what makes a good theory. So one thing is that a good theory must do more than just restate the oughts, right, that you believe in. It must explain why these oughts and not others are the good ones, or the right ones. Lots of us, if we reflect upon it, or we read political philosophy, you will find out that lots of us have a bunch of oughts, things we believe in, things that ought to be done, that aren't actually mutually consistent. Right? We might have problems in our thinking, that we believe one thing, we believe another thing, but actually whatever argument you might give for the one excludes the argument you might give for the other, and now you have a problem, right? Like you can't, well, unless you like being inconsistent, but it's kind of like intellectual suicide, so you can't do that. So we need to have a theory that explains, because only if we can explain can we understand it, right? That's the same with the burger. To understand the burger, we want to know what goes into it. So you might just say, like, well, it's a burger, you restate it, right? It's this piece of meat that I'm just putting into the machine. That's the analysis. Well, that's not really helping us to understand what is the burger, right? It's helping us understand it is saying that the beef, blah, blah, blah. So we need to have this, we need to be some type of explanation. So it needs to be unpacked in some way. And it's the only way we can test it, right? So go over those. We'll get back to this, right? So one. So here's the example of why that explaining part is important. So here, imagine a super Democrat, right? Like someone who's really into democracy. He has this theory, SD1, super democratic theory 1, right? This new one. So whatever is democratically decided is the morally right thing to do. Not very far from your Rousseau, if you remember. Okay. There's your theory, right? Well, it's not a theory, it's a statement of it's a summary of the theory, right? But there you go. Whatever is democratically decided is the morally right thing to do. Why democracy? Well, here's an answer, right? Now someone might object, say, well, SD1, no, it's SD1 it should be, but it stinks because, you know, the majority of ours, the 99% of us might just, you know, gang up on the remaining 1% and just take all their stuff, kill them, throw them out, whatever, right? Do all sorts of heinous things. Violate their rights, right? And violating rights is wrong. Crappy theory, right? Here's an objection. Now the super democrat says, okay, actually, just kidding. Here's better theory, SD2, right? Whatever is democratically decides the right thing to do, except when it violates rights. Much better, right? Now objection is met. Progress. In some ways it's progress, right? SD2 is way better than SD1. It's much more plausible. It's much better if you happen to be in the 1% than in this 99% of the people, right? It probably fits, I think, with a bunch of other moral ideas and principles that are very plausible, very likely to be true. But there you go, well, better theory. But it's not doing much for the super democrat, right? Because this theory is not really explaining anything, so as it is stated anyway, about why. Like, okay, so why is that an exception? So why the except when it violates rights? Unless we get some story, right? Like, why is this exception built in? Why do we move from SD1 to SD2? Why the comma, except to just get this just jerk off your back, right? That might be a reason, just like win the conversation. But as a theory, it's not, you know, you might win the discussion. Be happy about that, I guess. It's overrated, but you might win the discussion. But as a theory, it's not really improving because, well, we had this, and now we've moved to that, which is pretty different. Right? A major exception is added. But unless we know why this exception should be added, our understanding has not progressed at all. Right? Actually, it's gone back. Because now we have an element built into the theory that we don't understand. Right? And that's the theory's job is to help us understand it. So the theory is doing a worse job now. Here's what we're doing, right? We're just redescribing the odds that we began with, right? You're just saying, you know, okay, I like democracy. I think democracy is a good idea. So here's my theory. Democracy is really good. Right? And then somebody says, yeah, okay, but you also like respecting people's rights. That's true. So now my theory, democracy is good and rights are really good. But what we're doing is we're just restating what we started with, right? Like I knew I liked those things. Now my theory is I like those things. It's not telling me it's not helping us. Right? It's like saying throwing the burger in the machine says, it's a burger, right? Like, thank you. Right? It's not really helping. So we want to have it has to unpack in some way. So that's my point, right? The understanding part, the explanation part matters. Like just moving and just building in your exception or something doesn't, unless we have some story about why this, except when people violate rights, is consistent with or really should follow from what democratically is decided, we're not moving forward, we're moving backwards. So it's just the way in which, if we move, you know, we go through these theories this term, you read a theory, you think, okay, this theory is pretty good. Somebody raises an objection. You think, okay, well then maybe there's a limit to this theory. The limit is this objection. Well, yeah, good. You've won the day, but you're not thinking, right? So there's a way. What we're doing here is a way of testing theories. Right? So think back to SD1. It's basically the right thing to do is whatever is the democratically decided thing, right? So that's here, 3, the conclusion. Here's a possible argument, right? This is a little closer to a theory. Now we're getting some statements that move towards the conclusion, right? That we're looking for. So maybe something like this. Right thing to do for the state is to give the people what they want. Democratic decisions give the people what they want, right? Therefore it's democratic. It's not exactly logically valid, but you get my point. So, question, how might we test this?
Look for counterfactuals, like see what contradicts it if you follow through with the idea. So like, if all the people didn't get what they want, it would disprove too.
Oh, right, good. Right, so you're looking for counterexamples counter to what? To the premises, right? Right, exactly. Yeah, so I should have asked this in the beginning. So I know quite a few of you have some philosophical baggage. Has anyone here not taken a philosophy class before? A couple, 3, 4? Okay. Don't worry. Well, do worry and do worry, I don't know. The don't worry part is I should have said this in the beginning, but I won't assume that you know, like, that you have prior philosophical knowledge. All the philosophical questions that are going to matter in your exams or papers and so on are ones that we'll discuss right here. So, at the risk of being overly pedantic, but just to explain it, the way these type of arguments work, right, is here the therefore the 3 is going to be the conclusion of the argument. 1 and 2 are going to be the premises that lead up to the conclusion. Right? It's just generally how, at the most fundamental, basic way, logical reasoning works. Right? You have a claim that you like to defend, the conclusion, and you give reasons for it. As an argument consists of reasons for a conclusion, statements that lead up to the conclusion. And so these are the premises. It's just a term, just a name we call it premises. So premise 1 is this sentence, premise 2 is that, and then the idea in the argument as it presents is that these two lead up to 3. 1 and 2 together lead you to 3. So that if you believe in 1, if you believe 1 is true, and you believe that 2 is true, you must also believe that number 3 here is true. That's what the argument tries to show you. Right? And it's very effective, because if you try to have a disagreement with somebody, let's say with me, right, and I say like, hey, 3 is not true. And you say, but 1 and 2 lead up to 3, and hey, Van der Wassen, you believe 1? I say, yeah, maybe, I guess I believe 1. And you say, hey, Van der Wassen, you believe 2? So yeah, I guess I believe 2 as well. Then I have to believe 3, right? Because 1 and 2 lead you to 3. So that's why these arguments are very good tools. They're very basic tools, but very good tools, because you can show that you are right and someone else is wrong. Right? You can show that your theory is the right theory by showing what goes into it, analyzing the conclusion, right? And then showing like, well, actually, you believe all the parts that go into it, so you have to believe the actual thing. Well?
But don't 1 and 2, don't they have to establish that first what's the popular thing is the moral thing? Because 1 is saying that the right thing for the state to do is to give the people what they want.
Right.
Well, they just declared that the right thing is the same thing as what most people want. So before you make that argument, don't you have to establish first that the moral thing is whatever the most popular thing is, and that's all morality is, just what's popular?
Yeah, so if this is going to be, it's a very simplistic, quick and dirty argument, right? First of all. But you're right. You're totally right. What this theory is saying is like, hey, I believe that the democratically decided thing is the right thing to do for the state always. Right? Well, why might I believe that? Well, I actually believe that democratic decisions give people what they want. I might have some reasons for this. I say, well, here's why. Because the people get to vote and they get to lobby and so on. And then, this is a whole complicated process where the deciders are held accountable to the people. And through this process, the actual decision makers, the agents, will act in the interest of the people who they represent. That's my story. Right? Pretty good story. Maybe in real life it doesn't always work that way, but it's a pretty good story, right? I'm actually at least motivating this. Maybe it's true. Maybe if the democracy is set up the right way, it's true. Right? But of course the same has to be done with 1, right? So 1 is a moral claim. The right thing to do is to give the people what they want. And you're saying, well, okay, yeah, really? Maybe. But that's it's pretty out there, right? So if I was to give you a full theory, I would have to do some motivating of 1 as well. Right? I have to tell you, here's why I believe that 1 is true and that the right thing to do is to give the people what they want. Maybe I believe that doing things to people that they don't want is wrong, right? And so then maybe that follows then from that, maybe that the right thing to do is to give the people what they do want, something like that. But you're right, we need more. If we're going to spell this out, it's going to be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 100, 1,000 pages, right? If you really want to be careful, right? That's how philosophical books get long, right? Because you want to get, right? But you're, completely correct. So, for now, right? Let's say that for now that you think, this sounds pretty good, right? I said going against what they want is bad, so maybe going with what they want is good. All right, sounds pretty, as a beginning. Okay, this whole stuff about representation and accountability sounds pretty good, so maybe these are both true, right? This is your point, right? This is a way of testing the theory. We're seeing, here's the point that we try to defend, the conclusion. Here are the reasons that go into the conclusion. the way to test the theory is, well, first to check whether these things really lead up to the conclusion, right? It might not connect in the right way, so that these things really aren't reasons for believing that. It's just to check the logical structure of if this is logical thinking or not. If I said here, the right thing to do is they give the people what they want, and then I said 2 pigs can fly, right? That wouldn't lead up to 3 in any way. Like there's no connection. It's gibberish. Right? So it has to lead up in the right way. But then more importantly is we're going to test whether these are true or not. Right? So this is what McDermott is writing a lot about. Like people sometimes worry that there may be not any way to test these things. We say, well, actually there is some way because we can see, well, this is what goes into the theory. And let's test it, right? So you said, well, is the right thing to do to give the people what they want? Maybe you can find a counterexample. If you can find a counterexample, that would be an instance where this is not true, right? And then I'd have to rethink it. If you can show me. Let me see. Yeah, so check the truth. So let's see here. So just the first premise, you called it populist premise, was it? Was that how, Will, you said was it very populist? Was that the term you used?
I did not use that term.
Okay,
I'll
somebody used it?
myself with it.
Okay. I thought someone said it. Somebody else? Wow. Popular, right. Okay. Good, I was thinking, am I hallucinating here now? I'm just twisting people's words. All right. So how might we test this truth? So one possibility is just check how logically it fits with other beliefs. This is the counterfactual method, right? Like which is a counterexample method. It's not counter. Try to figure out, okay, someone is saying something. The right thing to do is for the state to give the people what they want. That's a reason for believing in the theory, right? That's how they present it. How do we check the theory? Well, we might check whether these reasons that go into the theory are acceptable. Because they are presenting us with this chain of reasoning. 1, 2, therefore 3. And 3 is the one they care about. Right? That's the theory. So if we can break the chain of reasoning, that's a way of getting out of the theory. Right? You might say 3 is not true because 1 is not true. Right? All right, so check how it fits with other things that are plausible, other odds, as McDermott would put it. Right? So we just see, can we fit in this claim with other things that we think are true? Like, does this fit into the moral landscape? Again, we're going to have to make some assumptions, right? We're going to assume that some things are right and wrong. But maybe if we can do that, we can see this actually fits in nicely with other things we believe to be true. And that's pretty good. That's a pretty good sign, right? Or maybe it conflicts with things all over the place, and maybe that's a bad sign. So here's one way to do it. I'm just going to spell it out. You might think this way, right? So 4, just continuing the numbering for clarity. It is possible that the people want to kill someone unpopular, but who is innocent, right? That's me. I'm stating this, right? Me as an objector. This could be true or false, but I'm claiming that that's possible. Then, if 1 is true, the right thing to do for the state is to give the people what they want, and 4 is true, right? That it's possible that the people want to kill someone who is innocent but unpopular. Then it follows, right, it must be possible that killing an unpopular but innocent person is morally the right thing to do. Right? Just can't, like, that follows from 1 and 4, right? All right, but it's morally wrong, right, to kill the innocent people even if they're unpopular. So we have to choose either 1 is true or 6 is true, but not both, right? We either have to give up one of these claims. Because 6 denies, right? Denies what we have here, right? It denies. It's the exact opposite. So if you believe in 1, and you believe that 4 is also, you believe that it's possible that unpopular people might be in trouble, right? And you believe that whatever the people want to do, the people they're in trouble with, is the right thing to do, then you have to believe that whatever the people want to do with this unpopular person is the right thing to do. And you can't believe that that's the right thing to do, and it would be wrong for them to do whatever they want, right? Kill them, or you could put in any other example. Right? Either is true, not both. So, we're checking the fit of 1 logically with other plausible beliefs, right? here's a belief in 6, it's morally wrong to kill unpopular beliefs, and we're finding that logically you cannot hold this at the same time as holding 1. So that only tells you this, right? You have to choose 1 or 6. Which one would you choose? 6? Yeah, most people would choose. Why would you choose 6? Except not to get arrested, maybe, but no.
I'm an innocent person, and I'd like to not be killed for something.
Right? Yeah. You wouldn't like it if
You may get unpopular one day.
Exactly.
you may get unpopular one day, right? And so what? Like, so why are these reasons for choosing 6 over 1?
Just because you're popular doesn't necessarily mean that ever right in your right in life. So that's kind of what, I guess, that's kind of, I mean, it's like, so if you get unpopular, it's usually right in life, and I don't think that's necessarily consistent.
Yeah, well, so let me say, okay, but now what about the people? Like, why should the people not get what they want just because you are afraid of becoming unpopular?
Well, because that's, when you're saying that, you're saying like, just because more people say something makes that right, and that's not necessarily true, because that's pretty much saying, like, if all of us as students claim something against what you said, that would make us automatically right, which is not necessarily true.
Right, right. Yeah, Cameron?
It also undermines a person's right to consent.
Right, good. So what you're pointing out here, right, is you're pointing out, hey, wait a minute. If I say, this will be 1 minute, we'll be done. Hey, wait a minute. If I'm going to reject 6 and keep 1, there's a whole bunch of other things here that I think are pretty important, and they're all got to go too, right? So now the price is not just 6, it's 6 plus 6A, 6B, 6C, 6D, 6E, right? And now the price of admission, right, for 1 is getting very high, right? Like the price of admitting 1 in my set of beliefs becomes rejecting 6 and a whole bunch of other things. And you might think, well, that's so unlikely that 6 kill, maim, kidnap, rape, like all these things can be done with 2 innocent people as long as the people like it. Like, no, there's too much, right? So what you're doing is you're showing that you believe more in one than in the other. Right? So here. Basically what you're saying is this. If 1 is true and 6 is not true, then a whole bunch of other things that likely seem true may turn out to be false. Wrong to steal, imprison, oppress, etc., right? It's much more likely that 6 and a bunch of other things are true than 1 is true, and so therefore, right? So that's what we're doing. We're like weighing. This is back to what you said in the beginning, like what seems right? Like we're just seeing, okay, well, I have to, logically, 1 turns out to conflict with not just 6, but a whole bunch of other stuff. And if I have to choose between them, then I'm going to choose to reject 1. And so we're testing, right? We've just tested this very, very rough democratic theory that had other issues too, but we tested it, right? Premise 1 actually cannot be true because I don't want to give up on the other thing. Now, can I demonstrate, like, without any doubt that 6 is definitely true? Like, we can't reject it. No, I can't. Right? But it seems true. It seems a lot more true than number 1. Like, it's much likelier to be true than 1 is. So. All right. So this is just like this is a kind of way of doing analytical political philosophy, right? So we started out saying some stuff about what is analysis, what is politics, what are theories. We saw a very crappy, simple theory, and we did some analysis. We said, what goes into it? 1 and 2 went into it. Like this thing and a claim about how democracies work. And now we're testing it. And so McDermott's point is when we do this, we really are acting as if it's science. We're trying to figure out the truth about this argument about democracy. We think it is true, right? That you can't just kill innocent people with right, even if the people would like it. Right? And so that's, I hope that this is an exercise that kind of helped illustrate that what we're going to be doing all term, but with better theories. All right, we went a little late. My apologies for that. I'll be better. See you guys on Thursday. I think it's still running. Why is it still running?